In California, it's often said that we are a car culture. At some point in the day, everyone needs to get from point A to point B, and it seems that everyone is doing it at the same time. Hollywood makes movies about trains, planes, and automobiles. But in 2014, are more lanes of freeway with gargantuan tunnels the answer to our current and future transportation problems? Or are there other, more modern ways to move us around? Let's find out on The Question Is with Anthony Portantino. Welcome to The Question Is with Anthony Portantino. Today we have a leading transportation expert, the Honorable Ara Najarian, a board member of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, who is joined by Sergio Gonzalez, the city manager of the great city of South Pasadena, and Robin Battles, the president of the Crescenta Valley Town Council, a wonderful foothill community. Ara, Robin, and Sergio will help us understand the impact of traffic in their communities and how this relates to contemporary transportation planning. So let's ask the question. Ara, thanks for being here. Robin and Sergio, thank you guys.
Thank you, Anthony.
Absolutely.
Great to be here.
Absolutely. Ara, you sit on the MTA, so you have to interact with the federal government, state government, local agencies, and then plan for the next 100 years of transportation in California. What's going on?
Yes, I do. Anthony, transportation planning is wonderful, and it's wonderfully complicated.
That's an understatement.
The board that I sit on, the LA Metro, is in charge of planning all the bus routes, all the highways, and all the light rail lines in Los Angeles County. Now, where does the money come from? Because money is really what makes the transportation world go around.
Pays for shovels.
It pays for shovels and a lot of jobs. The federal government helps us out occasionally through the Department of Transportation. The state of California, through the California Transportation Commission and Caltrans, helps us with the highways. But a lot of the heavy lifting is done right at the local level, and that's the LA County Metro.
So things like Measure R.
Measure R was a voter-passed initiative in 2009, which gave transportation planning a huge boost in LA County. Many of the projects that you see underway are a direct result of the funding that came from Measure R.
And most of them are well received and good projects, which is why the voters supported Measure R.
Many voters are extremely happy with all the work that's been done on Measure R. They can really see the tangible benefits of their extra half-cent sales tax, which is going dedicated to transportation issues.
Now, obviously, within Measure R and within Metro's purview and planning, there is some debate over whether we want more freeways versus more alternative transportation. In particular, the 710 gap closure is something that's getting a lot of conversation these days.
It certainly is, Anthony. It's one of the big questions that we have. One of the big issues is how can we resolve the transportation gap between the 710 when it ends in El Sereno and where it picks up again, where the 210 essentially dead ends in Pasadena. The old school, if President Eisenhower were still around, good old Ike, he would say, well, let's build a freeway.
8 lanes.
8 lanes freeway, and we'll get the job done. And we can move our tanks back and forth if there ever was a war on the West Coast. But I think that sort of mentality has dropped off. Our new generation is thinking more contemporarily, and they realize that freeways don't help. You build a freeway, it's going to be clogged as soon as you open it.
Right.
The real way to sustainable transportation improvements are to use things like light rail. And I'm hoping that as we discuss this issue, everyone involved, once they look at the facts, will see that the light rail is really the best solution for closing the gap, the 710 gap.
It's a much better way to move people. Robin, obviously you live in La Crescenta, which is one of the communities that has joined the coalition against the 710 for local reasons, local concerns. Could you walk us through, what's happening in La Crescenta? You're a longtime resident. Share with us what you see as the impacts and why you're concerned about transportation planning for LA County.
Well, thanks, Anthony. I will tell you that I have lived in La Crescenta for over 50 years and grew up here and was there when the 210 was originally built. Used to play on it as a kid. And everyone was worried, oh, the traffic's coming, and they were right. So fast forward, and now here we are today, and the concern is exactly the same. With the extension of the 210 that went all the way out to the 30, our traffic, I mean, in my observation, it looks as if it's tripled with semis every time of the day, where it used to be a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the evening. And so our concern is we've got extra pollution. We've got our biggest high school sits right on the 210, so we're worried about our kids' health. We're looking at residents. We have no sound walls, and even today we should have those.
And now the impact isn't just on the freeway, too. You're seeing also arterial local streets as people get on and off. It becomes a magnet.
It's a disaster already. I mean, you have one, it seems as if weekly there's some type of auto accident or a semi-truck accident. And what happens is everyone comes off the 210 and it just congests Foothill Boulevard, which runs the distance from La Cañada through La Crescenta, the Glendale Annex, on into Sunland Tujunga. And it just brings our quiet community to a halt.
Right. And if you think about it, if the gap gets closed through 8 lanes of freeway, people who go from San Francisco to San Diego who want to avoid downtown are going to come through all those communities you mentioned and bypass downtown, creating an even bigger magnet for congestion and traffic. So thank you for being part of the coalition, and La Crescenta has been a very strong advocate to protect the quality of life in your community. Sergio, it's interesting that when this conversation happens, most people say, well, it's just the people who live in the foothills who are concerned, and I always say, but a tunnel has an opening on 2 ends, and what affects the southern end of the tunnel is going to affect the top end. And so you actually grew up in Monterey Park, but now are the city manager in South Pass. How are you interacting with the communities of El Sereno, Monterey Park, South Pass? Could you share with us a little bit about the impacts there, and then also what the city of South Pass is doing?
Well, thank you, Anthony. South Pasadena has been fighting the 710 for, I think, longer than I've been alive. And, you know, it's not just South Pasadena in this mix now. I grew up in Monterey Park, spent a lot of time in Alhambra and El Sereno. And being a city manager of a local jurisdiction, I can understand how people feel proud of where they live and their home values, et cetera. But if you really think about it, South Pasadena at this point would be bypassed. And so we're really thinking about the communities that can't speak up for themselves. We really need to look at 21st century solutions to get people out of their cars, to think about the impacts that the portal will have in the southern portion of the stub. It will be tremendous impacts to local communities. 2 years of trucks hauling dirt away. Look at the noise pollution, the air pollution, the impacts to local businesses. So we're not just talking about South Pasadena, we're not just talking about Pasadena, we're talking about the communities of Monterey Park, Alhambra, and specifically El Sereno. People keep forgetting that the actual portal is not in Alhambra, it's in El Sereno.
One of the criticisms of the community outreach component during the planning process was the lack of sort of bilingual efforts and really a cursory attempt to reach the community of El Sereno and to really, I mean, there's a lot of social justice and environmental justice issues that have been raised. Do you see those as legitimate criticisms of the community outreach? I mean, from your observation, how do you feel over the last 4 years the powers that be, exclusive of Mr. Najarian, who has always been advocating for more community outreach, what has been your impression of that?
Well, there's different modes and ways to get outreach to the community. You can do print material, you can do fancy videos, but in areas where people do not receive these fancy pamphlets or have the opportunity or time to attend a town hall meeting because they have to work or they have children to attend to, you got to do a grassroots effort. And that's the way you get the community involved. You got to get the local organizations who are essentially the voice for those who can't speak up for themselves, and you got to get out to those communities block by block and inform them of what their rights are and how their lives are going to change if this project comes through their city.
Now, one would argue that the reason why they didn't do that is because they didn't want to get the negative answer. That's sort of a cynical view of their approach, but I think there's a lot of credibility. What do you think?
Well, I think if you don't want the truth, you don't ask the question.
You don't ask the question.
And
Exactly.
if they want the truth, they'll ask the question. And if the El Sereno residents would understand that their voice is important and can come on board now and say, we want to be heard. We want a 21st century solution. We want our streets safe. We want our kids to have the option to get on the light rail, go from East LA all the way to PCC, all the way to APU. Anywhere in the San Gabriel Valley you can travel on light rail, that will be a tremendous positive impact.
Absolutely. Robin, obviously the 210 is a long freeway that covers many, many foothill communities. Going along the 210 is the Gold Line, a light rail system that is planned to go all the way to the Ontario airport. One of the interesting struggles in transportation is the Gold Line has to fight for every dollar. How do you think residents of the foothills would embrace the Gold Line and having an opportunity to hop on a train and end up at an international airport? Do you think that's something that would be well received by La Crescenta and the foothills?
You know, it's a really great question. I think that we have been so focused on saying what we don't want. We haven't taken the time to say, hey, this is a great alternative. I can tell you that many residents will get in their car and drive to Pasadena, get on the metro, get on the Gold Line, and go do the rest of their adventure, and they absolutely love it. So I think with some great planning, I think that you would really get a lot of support for something of that nature in our community, because it reduces the noise, it reduces the pollution, it reduces the cars. You know, our kids, we keep telling our kids, hey, let's get out, let's walk, let's be healthy, but you're saying, let's get in our cars and drive through an 8-lane tunnel. That just seems incongruent to our community who's trying to be healthy.
I sort of set up the Gold Line for you because that's one of the, you know, as a Metro board member, you're fighting on behalf of the Gold Line, but also fighting to bring sound decisions to the gap closure. How do we get people united behind the Gold Line and see that the $10+ billion for the 710 8 lanes of tunnel isn't really a 21st century solution?
Well, Anthony, very good question. Now, the experts are giving us their opinion on the gap closure in about 6 months through the EIR. But
Environmental impact
the
report.
environmental impact report. But that doesn't mean we have to park our common sense and lock it up in the cupboard. A tunnel that costs $10 billion could fund almost every single light rail project that is needed in the entirety of Los Angeles County. Think about what a tunnel would bring. It will bring fumes, it will bring congestion, and God forbid there's an accident like we see every day on the 210 freeway or the 10 freeway that involves fire, that involves big rigs, trucks. It's going to be an inferno down there. We don't need that. We owe better for our residents. And I encourage all your viewers to think about this issue. Wouldn't you rather have a modern light rail taking you back and forth, or would you rather risk your lives and the lives of your children in a 5-mile-long tunnel and have your fingers crossed that, God forbid, that big rig in front of you doesn't spin out and dump its load of oil, gasoline, chemicals on you and your children?
And Sergio, that 5-mile tunnel, where's the exhaust going to go?
Well, we understand it's going to be sent to the portals, but
And
that
where are the
technology
portals?
that technology does not exist today.
And the portals are in residential neighborhoods.
Absolutely.
Right.
And if you look at the tunnel alternative, you're looking at a 5-mile tunnel that is not going to be free, by the way. I don't think we've brought this up so
Right.
far in
We'll
the
get
segment.
to the funding in the next part.
Right. But if you look at what you can do with $10 billion, I mean, connecting the Gold Line to Ontario on both the east and the Gold Line Foothill extension, and maybe a light rail to Burbank Airport and also international LAX, what kind of a system we would be the envy of the United States? And we may be catching up to the world in terms of transportation modern solutions.
Absolutely. When we come back on The Question Is with Anthony Portantino, we haven't even talked about the cost and the true impact of this project. So we're going to continue on The Question Is. Join us in a couple minutes.
Who needs this modern world? I can live just fine out here without the road rage and boy bands. Of course, I might miss my Charter HD with football on ESPN and Walking Dead on AMC. ESPN and AMC. And, well, Shark Week on Discovery HD. But that's all. AMC, ESPN, Discovery, TBS, and Comedy Central HD. But that's it. Except for HBO HD.
Charter now has over 100 HD channels and more brilliant HD shows on demand than ever.
We're back on The Question Is with Anthony Portantino with three great guests talking about transportation in Los Angeles County. Mr. Najarian, you sit on the MTA, so you have to sit with interests, competing interests from around Los Angeles County, local governments, county governments, political appointees, the mayor of Los Angeles. It's amazing that things get done, but they do. But often, sometimes inertia takes over. And I would say the 710 gap closure is pretty much a project of inertia because it's just something that's been on the drawing board forever. Walk us through how a project gets identified and then what could happen and what would you like to see happen?
Well, Anthony, a project usually gets on the list of things to do or things to be considered by being placed on the long-range transportation plan. Now, that's really just a wish list. It doesn't mean by any means that a project on that list will be created and be a reality. So what happens is that there is an evaluation that's done. And in that evaluation, planning staff comes up with a preferred plan. That plan then is matched with other alternatives that would solve the same problem. In this case, in the 710, let's call it the first plan was a freeway. But next to that freeway plan are alternatives. There are busways, there's a light rail, there's a low build adjustment of the roadway system and synchronization. And that's what's happening now in the environmental impact report.
Now, presumably MTA and staff would do some cost-benefit analysis and determine some preliminary cost estimates and impacts with a project of this size and scope. Has that happened?
Unfortunately and surprisingly, it has not happened. For years, I was trying to get an answer from the MTA.
By the way, wasn't that a softball question I gave?
That was. Thank you. Brings back memories. How much is this proposed project, whether it's a subway, a tunnel, or a light rail, going to cost? Light rail, we know how much it costs. It's set figures. But for a tunnel, I kept getting the runaround. They didn't want to give me a number because they knew deep down that when anyone with God-given common sense heard how much it would cost to build that tunnel, it would die as a project immediately.
So someone could go to the public record of the MTA and say, there was a motion made in public to determine the cost of this project before moving forward, and those motions were voted down.
Absolutely. Believe it or not.
Let me say that again. Let me ask that question again. Someone could go to the public record and say, look for a motion that asks how much this would cost, and people in power other than yourself have voted down wanting to know how much it would cost.
And not just voted down, but the maker of that motion, myself, ridiculed and vilified at the board level by board staff and by members of the audience who support the tunnel.
Just for wanting to know the cost.
Just for wanting to know the cost.
Robin, let me ask you a question. When you sit at the dais of the town council, if there's a project being discussed, would it be your duty to find out how much it was going to cost? How would your constituents react?
It's interesting because the first question we say is, okay, you want to do that. What's it going to cost and where's the money going to come from?
Right,
Pretty simple.
right. And so here we have a case where they're doing the opposite.
Well, yeah, I mean, and as far as La Crescenta is concerned, no one's come to us and said, this is how it's going to affect your roadways, this is the cost, this is how it's going to affect your community. I think because we're not right next to the connection, they think doesn't affect us, yet it has a tremendous impact on us. And all of this money, we keep hearing figures, and it's like, what else can we do with that money? We seem to be looking at one segment and not the entire population. I mean, just think if we moved on with what R is talking about and have a gold line and a great infrastructure with light rail, you could move our seniors around. They can't drive. They're not driving to LAX. They're not driving anywhere. So I think he's got a great idea.
Absolutely. Sergio, some people say, well, what is South Pasadena's beef? It's going to be tunneled under their city and, problem solved.
Right.
We're just going to do this 8-lane giant tunnel. And they show pictures of the tunneling machine. It looks like something from Star Wars.
Right.
And the people standing next to it are this big, and it's this giant foreign-built piece of construction material. So how do we answer the question, why does South Pasadena care if it's going to be tunneled under the city?
The main reason is, Anthony, is stewardship, good stewardship of public dollars. I'm a local city administrator, and I pride myself on that, being a good steward of public dollars and pushing a freeway tunnel that we don't even know. I like to borrow your question mark on your set every time we ask the question. We don't even know how much it's going to cost. Now, South Pasadena can just walk away and say, you know what, this is going to go under our city, we're not even going to see it, and we'd be fine. But you know what? That's not what South Pasadena is doing. We have a known commodity in a light rail system. We know how popular the Gold Line is, and yet we're pursuing something that we don't even know if it's going to work. We don't even know if we're going to be able to build it. Let's talk about Seattle and Washington. So we have a known commodity in a light rail system that is very popular, and we're choosing to put an alternative against a freeway tunnel that doesn't make sense. You look at Monterey Park, you look at Alhambra. Monterey Park has 0 stops earmarked towards the light rail tunnel, the light rail alternative. Alhambra has 1, and where's it located? It's located in an industrial park. South Pasadena, 2 additional stops are earmarked towards South Pasadena.
It's almost like by not addressing the local arterial situations, and for me, one of the frustrations is that's where there's common ground. Everybody agrees that communities under the current system have local traffic impacts because they weren't designed to accommodate the volume of traffic that's coming through their communities now. But we're not addressing any of those local impacts. We're
No.
not doing any light synchronization. We're not doing any, smart growth patterns, and certainly the Gold Line, which everybody wants, is taking a back seat. And that's, to me, what frustrates me the most, is here's a project that everybody wants, that has its environmental clearances, that creates jobs. And I say to my friends in the building trades, we're talking about $1 billion worth of jobs for the Gold Line that we should start doing tomorrow. But yet it doesn't seem like that's happening.
South Pasadena embraced the Gold Line. In 2003, it opened up. And if you walk down Mission Street, if you see the energy and the businesses that are popping up in that area, you'll be very eager to get it in your city.
Right.
It also looks that South Pasadena for the past 30, 40 years has been saying what people are now understanding. You need a low-build, multi-mode alternative. You can't build your way out of congestion. You build
Now-
it, it'll get congested.
And part of your analysis has been on goods movements as well, right? You're not just talking about people.
That's correct. I mean, when you're talking about movement, you're talking about moving people out of their cars, get them onto light rail, and you need to get goods onto heavy rail and get them directly to distribution centers so that they don't become a bottleneck in our local streets and our local freeway system, and get it out to where it needs to be throughout the nation.
Sergio brought up Seattle. There are some lessons that one could learn from Seattle. So walk us through what they're doing and why it's relevant to what is currently on the docket.
Thanks, Anthony. And by the way, when really pushed to give me an answer as to how much the tunnel would cost, they said, oh, well, we've got the best answer for you, Mr. Nigerian. They're building a tunnel in Seattle. So we'll just use that as an example and use their contracts and use their cost per mile as the estimate that we're going to give you. The only problem with that is, as we sit right now, actually since the beginning of the year, the big alien tunnel machine that they call Big Bertha is broken down, stopped, stalled, not moving, waiting for repairs to be done 69 feet under the streets of Seattle.
Only 69, because our tunnel is supposed to be 300 feet below.
Yes, it is. Imagine that. So using the Seattle tunnel as an example is a failure. And the costs are rising every day. And even the director of the Seattle Department of Transportation has said that he can't guarantee that that tunnel will ever be built.
Tell me about the funding model, the cost per mile for Seattle. Are they using the same cost per mile funding model for the proposed 710 tunnel?
That's what they used when they were pushed to give me an answer. And that assumes the best soil conditions, the best work schedule, the best reliable machines, But it's failed. Every one of those assumptions has failed, and the city of Seattle, the residents and taxpayers of Seattle, are on the hook for millions of dollars every week in delayed expenses caused by that.
And before Seattle, we had Boston's Big Dig. How did that go?
It didn't go very well, actually. A $3 billion tunnel, initially estimated, ended up costing $15 billion. And even then, the panels were falling off the roof, crushing people in their cars for the first year of its opening.
Now, one could argue that the reluctance to put hard dollars and hard traffic counts on the table is part of their funding model is to do a public-private partnership, which means tolls. And Sergio brought it up earlier that this is not going to be a free ride, so to speak. Robin, do you think folks are going to spend $100 a toll? Or do you think they'd be more apt to spend $2 a toll? What do you think?
Let me think about that, 200. I'm going to go with $2. And you know, it's interesting is that we haven't been told. I mean, nobody wants to get in that tunnel. I mean, it's not built. We just look around and we're like, we're not. You know, we're in California. We're in Southern California. Can you say earthquake?
Right.
So we'll spend the $2. We'd like some permanent infrastructure that is much more modern than a tunnel.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the frustrations is the way you can determine the cost of the estimate of the toll would be to know how many cars and trucks are estimated to use it. And just like with the cost dollars, we don't have traffic count estimates that are reliable either, do we?
No, we don't. It's a complete, fly by the seat of your pants. However, there are engineering firms and construction firms who have billions of dollars at stake to gain if this tunnel project were approved.
And they're lining up around the block, aren't they?
They absolutely are.
Yeah. Sergio, when they come to the city of South Pasadena, do they present to you any environmental documents that show that air quality will be better? Has there been any documentation to justify or substantiate any of the contentions that are being made?
You know, what I consider is what ifs, and it could potentially improve air quality, but one of my biggest concerns is not only is the cost, but who's going to be left on the hook for it. You think about this. If it's a public-private partnership, and if that private entity is willing to take 100% of the risk, I'm all for it. Have at it. But my biggest concern is that there's a guarantee of return on investment that will be guaranteed by the taxpayers, and then we'll be left on the hook for decades and even generations to come to make this private entity that's supposed to take all the risk whole. And that's my biggest concern as a local administrator.
So one of the things they're telling everybody is don't worry, don't be concerned. The environmental impact report's going to answer all of our questions, but yet that's been delayed, and people are speculating why that's been delayed. Do you have a take on why the environmental impact report's been delayed, and do you think it's going to be the panacea that everyone tells us it's going to be?
Well, first let me tell you why it's delayed. It's delayed because our Southern California planning agency, SCAG, Association of Governments, has said, wait a minute, folks, we've got some new traffic figures that we'd like to plug into the traffic model, and that'll help us make our decision. SCAG. Now, coincidentally, the director of SCAG, Hassan Nakrada, was seen at the pro-tunnel pep rally touting the benefits of the tunnel. So get this straight. We're waiting for his agency to give us unbiased figures on the transportation and traffic, while he himself is out there pounding the table saying the tunnel is the way to go, the tunnel is the way to go. That in itself has tainted the EIR project, and it will be challenged from day one when that EIR comes out. He should be ashamed of himself for making that sort of representation.
Well, I hate to cut off the conversation on the 710 gap closure, but just to sum things up, we don't know how much it's going to cost. We don't know how many people are going to use it. We have better alternatives on the table that are cheaper and move more people, move more goods in an environmentally sound way that don't destroy qualities of life both in the southern part of Los Angeles County and the northern part of Los Angeles County. Stay tuned and watch the 710 gap closure conversation continue. This was not an unbiased conversation tonight, but I'll tell you, you got more facts here than you do from the other side. Be well.